A very warm welcome, Dr. Larry Bacow, to another one of our How Conversations. Welcome, Dr. Bacow.
Thank you very much. Please call me Larry.
It's a genuine delight to have the 29th president of Harvard University, Dr. Larry Bacow, and I will call you Larry, join us. Larry is known and is considered to be one of the most respected and widely known and widely respected leaders in American higher education. And because of that, also just the leader generally in society. And you were also a Hauser leader in residence at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government at the Center for Public Leadership. But I think the theme here is that you are a public leader, that you're a servant leader, that you've been leading in ways that are from your heart designed to move society and community forward. But I think most admiringly, you focused on our next generation, the education of students and how to move that along. Is it fair to say that's your animating passion and ethos?
Yeah, but I sort of came to leadership in an odd way. I dodged it most of my life. I enjoyed being a faculty member, and so I enjoyed teaching my students. I enjoyed doing my research. I avoided academic administration actually for 21 of my 24 years at MIT. In fact, when I became president of Tufts, somebody once asked me a question about, my path to leadership, and I confessed that prior to becoming president of Tufts, the only thing I had ever been president of in my life was the National Honor Society in high school. And at least in my high school, we held one meeting a year, and that was to elect the officers for the next year. So it was not a great leadership opportunity in any way, shape, or form. But I've sort of late in life, I would say, or late in my academic career, sort of had it sort of thrust upon me, if you will, and have sort of answered the call when the opportunity has arisen.
What do you know now about your early life, either crucibles, how you grew up, where you grew up, that really has been a constant for you, that is at the center of why you've been able to be so successful in leadership?
Well, I think like most people, I was very much shaped by my parents. And my parents are both, products of the American dream, I think. Both of my parents came to this country as immigrants. They were both refugees coming here. And I've often said, where else in the world can you go from one generation off the boat with literally nothing? My mother was a survivor of Auschwitz. She had lost her whole family. She was the only member of her family who survived, actually the only Jew from her town who survived the war. And she comes to this country as an orphan, literally with one suitcase on a troop ship that brought refugees from Europe after World War II. My father was born in Minsk. He came before the war to escape the pogroms of Eastern Europe. So I feel like I've enjoyed extraordinary opportunity in my life. Higher education has been at the center of it. And so part of what has been a motivating force is to ensure that others have the same kind of opportunity that I've enjoyed. But my parents also were role models in their own way. My father, who was a lawyer, was an extremely principled man, and who was fearless in his willingness to stand for his principles, even to the point of sometimes making his kids uncomfortable for some of the positions that he took in our town. And my mother, having sort of survived among the worst that history has ever created, emerged from that as somebody who was very optimistic, still forward-looking, and with a sense that we are here to do good for others, and sort of she was an extremely compassionate person.
I think you and I both know that one of the ironies of living in the world is that being principled is often inconvenient. Being principled is often unpopular. Let's just take the public stance you've taken on immigration in your role. The speech you gave in 2019 in China, right, on academic freedom, where you quoted a poem by a Uyghur poet, and that speech got less press, if at all, than others?
Not in China. In
Not-
China, in China, it was tweeted, I think, 2 million times within
Yeah.
an hour of being given.
Right.
So
What framework do you, besides the strength you have, what frameworks do you use to decide what public issues to engage with and which to leave alone? And then what framework do you use to create your point of view or your stance on the issue? And then what framework do you use to go about making it not just your point of view, but enlisting others so that there's a we and an institutional point of view, so that those in your community believe that you are speaking for the we?
you know, I remember that when my mother told me that when she was liberated by the Russians at the end of the war, and she literally had to walk 400 miles back to her hometown to see if anybody else survived, which they didn't. That when she got back there, she never felt more alone or abandoned by the world than she did at any other time in her life. She felt like the whole world had forgotten her. And when I went to China, I knew that we had both a young woman who had been who applied to graduate school at Harvard and been accepted to Harvard. She was actually a graduate of Amherst College and accepted into, I believe, our history PhD program. And she was a Uyghur and she was imprisoned in Zhejiang. And we had another person who we had invited to come to Harvard as a visiting scholar. He was a distinguished scholar who was also imprisoned. He was also a Uyghur. And so, you know, my mother's words echoed in me that, you know, alone or abandoned. And so one of the privileges of my job is that I have the capacity to give voice to those who don't have it. And so I decided I would use that opportunity to speak out. Now, I did something on the same day, which actually this is the first time I've ever talked about it publicly. I met that day, this was covered widely in the press, with Xi Jinping. And we engaged for about an hour in conversation on a variety of issues. I did not mention the plight of the Uyghurs to him. That would not have been appropriate. But as we concluded our conversation, I handed him a letter. And I said, I'd appreciate if you would take this letter, if you would read this letter and get back to me on the subject of the letter. And of course, in the letter, I raised the issue of these two individuals specifically and said that we were prepared to welcome them into the Harvard community. I mean, there are opportunities in the job that I have to do things like that. Right. And I think, you know, when one has it, it's appropriate to do so.
You mentioned bully pulpit, and it was Teddy Roosevelt said that the presidency, and he was talking about the US presidency, the bully pulpit is a pulpit of moral leadership. And I think that would be true of being president of any venerated institution, a place like Harvard. What is your framework or model or definition of moral leadership?
So, you know, I got some very good advice from my predecessor at Tufts. There was a wonderful man by the name of John DiBiagio.
Yeah.
John said, I'm only going to give you one piece of advice. I said, what's that, John? And he said, do the right thing.
Yeah.
And as I've thought about that, I've realized that, and now when I give similar advice to new presidents, to new deans, I sort of put my own spin on it. And I usually say to them, the only piece of advice I'll give you is what I was given. Do the right thing. It's usually not that difficult to figure out. It's often excruciatingly difficult to do. And that's when you really need to do it. So, you know, lots of decisions that come to me don't have, you know, heavy moral dimensions to them. In fact, most don't. And, you know, one of the challenges of leadership is the higher you go in an organization, the tougher the decisions get, because all the no-brainers have been decided before they get to your desk.
As a moral leader, tell us about your how you go about getting the right people in the room, the wrestling, the splitting fine hairs, maybe you're choosing between two bad decisions, and not a good one and a bad one, but you have to choose between, you have a true dilemma and they're both not great, but you've got to make a decision anyhow. Tell us about the how and how you do it with others.
My strategy for affecting change, and it's on virtually any issue, is to try and make my problems other people's problems.
Mm.
In my position, people are constantly coming to me advocating for something or criticizing something, in some cases, a decision that I've made. And my strategy is to listen to them.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, frequent conversation that I've had would be to say, Dov, you've made a really good argument. And if I were sitting where you were sitting, I don't think I could make a better argument, but I'm not. So let me explain to you why I've done what I have, or why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if you can look me in the eye and say that you would do something differently, given that you were sitting where I'm sitting, then we've got something to talk about. But if you're all you're doing is you're sort of saying, do this because it's going to, optimize over my preferences, over my situation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't do that because I have a responsibility to the entire organization.
What are your early thoughts on how you and the community have been changed by the pandemic, and how things will be different going forward because of having lived through it?
We were among the first of the universities to send students home. And in making that decision, I realized that if Harvard did it, it would make it easier actually for other institutions to do it, that we would provide some air cover. So that was actually in the back of my mind. I knew we would be criticized for acting prematurely, but everything that I was being told was this is going to be a serious public health problem. We prioritized the health and safety of our community first, but also the preservation of the academic mission. And those were the two things that were front of mind throughout it. It was clear at the very beginning, as I think it is in most crises, that you never have perfect information. And part of what I did was to tell people that we would make mistakes, but that we were going to recognize these mistakes quickly and fix them even faster. And one of the things which the pandemic did was it laid bare all sorts of inequality, and in many cases amplified those underlying inequalities in our society. And we're still coming to grips with that.
Yeah. And in the spirit of veritas, truth, when truths become illuminated or revealed or laid bare, there's an immediate duty to confront whatever is compelled by those truths. And to quote you, I believe we lay bare a moral responsibility to do what we can to address the persistent corrosive effects of those historical practices on individuals, on Harvard, and on our society. And that's a more specific, recent laying bare that came to the fore around slavery. But more broadly, with the report you put out, tell us about that particular laying bare and how you're going about that, and the report that you just put out, and the leadership around that.
This began a number of years back when a member of our faculty, Sven Beckert, who's a historian, started teaching a first-year seminar for freshmen, first-year students, trying to understand what Harvard's ties were to slavery. And then my predecessor, Drew Faust, commissioned a first small faculty committee to look into some of these issues, and recognized that a number of Harvard presidents, for example, had owned enslaved people that they had worked on our campus, and commemorated the memory of those by joining with John Lewis, the great civil rights leader, to put a plaque on the second oldest building at Harvard, Wadsworth House, which was the old president's residence at Harvard. And Benjamin Wadsworth was a president who, in fact, had enslaved people working in that house. That committee raised a lot of questions, which it didn't have time to answer. So when I became president, it was clear that we needed to complete this work. And also, in fairness, it was clear that other institutions were well ahead of us in doing this work. We were candidly late to the party. So I formed a committee and asked them to really try and document and understand and do scholarship research Harvard and its legacy of slavery. And that committee produced a report, which we just released. But the report that I commissioned was really targeted on, focused. The charge was to look at our entanglements with slavery. And the report that came back documented all these. And then the question was, what's our responsibility? And what I said, as you quoted, is that we benefited from these policies. In some cases, some of our faculty actually provided scholarship, later proved to be faulty, erroneous. The nice thing about scholarship, it tends to be error correcting, but which provided an intellectual justification in some cases for what now is viewed as white supremacy. And so I said I thought we bore a moral obligation to do what we can to correct the persistent inequities that continue to exist in almost any metric of equality that one would look at.
You've spoken around this sense that when a university is not open or not open to all, or not open to all points of views, trust declines. What's your thought on what we're reading about what's happening in institutions of higher learning around true openness to all ideas and the ethic of combustion and being better for it?
So universities are microcosms of society. Everything that you will find challenging or problematic in the rest of society, you will find within universities. We live in deeply polarized times. I don't have to tell you that. And there are equally polarized positions on university campuses. It's also the case that technology has contributed to that polarization. Students and others often don't feel free to speak their minds for fear that somebody will tweet about what they say or comment on it, and the entire world will descend upon them. Whether or not it's descending from the right or the left, it almost doesn't make a difference. And that's caused people to be cautious in what they say. In some cases, not to engage as freely or as openly as we might have them do. I think that imposes an affirmative obligation on institutions like ours to model the behavior that we would, hope to see elsewhere. And so what does that mean? Well, it means, at times bringing faculty together to debate some of the great issues of the day, but to consciously ask faculty to represent positions that are counter to those that they might hold personally.
No.
The Harvard Law School does a brilliant job of this on a regular basis, because students know what positions faculty have taken on some of the great issues of the day. And when they see faculty debating these things, and of course, a law school, this is what you try and teach in a law school, but consciously taking opposite positions to those that they personally believe in, that's modeling the kind of behavior that an openness that we would hope to see.
You've said in a world in which more and more decisions are likely to be made by machines, I think part of what we teach in institutions like Harvard is what does it really mean to actually be human in such a world? And a machine can be programmed to do the next thing right, but only a human being can do the next right thing. Your animating ethos, just do the right thing. How are you going about educating the heart, the seat of values, human qualities, from empathy to compassion, to the ability to see the full humanity in the other?
You don't want to make leadership all about yourself. Leadership should be about the institution. At the same time, students especially are curious about where we all came from and how we got to be where we are and what shaped us. And, a willingness to engage on those issues, just sort of like we're doing now, I think can be helpful. And I try to pick my spots. One of the privileges of being president of a university is that I have opportunities to engage and communicate with students and others at times when they are really listening. In times of crisis, there's another opportunity to address people when they're really, really paying attention and talking to them about what their responsibility is at the moment. Whether or not it's a responsibility to wear a mask and social distance, or, whether or not it's a responsibility to figure out, in light of the report that we've just produced, what can each of us do to build a better Harvard? That's something which we all share. It's not just my job. It's theirs. So I think that's, much of leadership is sharing the burden, if you will, and giving people a sense of agency.
So as we're heading to a close of what's been for me a meaningful conversation, and thanks for being so open and sharing both your journey and current lessons in a more rapid fire way. I'm just going to ask you just a few questions. So first, you're all about the next generation. What's the most important lesson in leadership that you've learned the hard way that you'd want to impart to an up and coming leader now?
Well, I think I've already said it, that two things: make leadership about the institution, not about yourself, and always do the right thing. Usually not that difficult to figure out, often excruciatingly difficult to do.
And advice on being good at this? Is it get the right mentors, surround yourself with the right people? If this is the imperative, some advice on how to get good at this or build the skills?
One of the things which I tell our students is that you cannot learn how to be a good leader until you first know what it's like to follow somebody. And I worry sometimes that the kinds of students which we get to a place like this have had expectations of being leaders of everything from the time they were 5 years old. But become a connoisseur, if you will, of other leaders and what they do, and understand what it feels like yourself to be motivated by someone else. That's, I think, really, really important. You cannot lead unless you actually know how to follow.
And you've asked people to be not just leaders, but citizen leaders. Just for the record, what is your conception of citizenship, and why is it so important to not just lead, but be a citizen leader?
We need a very, very strong civil society in this country and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to be president of a major university or of a major company or of a foundation or become a general in the army or something like that. But we need people who are willing to help strengthen institutions all across society. We need people who are going to be willing to help make their professional communities stronger, their local communities stronger, their faith-based communities stronger. And so a citizen leader is not somebody who's got a big title in front of them, but they're the kind of people that others sometimes will look to because they can see opportunity where others only see challenges. They have the capacity to bring people together when others only see division. They're good at finding resources where others only see scarcity. And we all know people like this, and they often don't have fancy titles, but they're the kind of people that others look to because they just know how to get things done.
What are your thoughts on hope? And secondly, and I think this should be the last question, what gives you hope when you think about the future?
So I tend not to talk about hope as much as what I always say is that you cannot lead unless you can persuade people that the future is going to be better than the present. That's how you actually get people to move from their current position, is by helping them understand where the opportunity is. And opportunity can mean lots of different things in lots of different contexts. But the job of a leader is to persuade people that moving in a particular direction will actually make things better. And better may mean different things in different contexts. That's what it means to lead.
Why don't we end on that note? Because it's a hopeful, lovely note. And Dr. Larry Bacow, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being so open about your remarkable journey and how it continues to inform your leadership. But thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation. I appreciate it.